Good afternoon, I am Xian, and this is Five Guys News. Today, we dive into a fundamental concept in contract law, the principle that consideration must not be passed. Our top stories tonight, Roscola vs. Thomas, and we can say patterns, what patterns each party give or promise to give as part of the contract. And it is a crucial element for a contract to be legally binding. The principle states that this consideration must be provided in the present or future, not in the past. In simple terms, when parties enter into a contract, they must exchange something of value at the time of making the statement or promises. Past actions or promises that occur before the contract was formed are generally not considered as valid consideration. For example, if Party A promises to pay Party B a certain amount of money in exchange for a service, Party A cannot base this promise on a service Party B provided in the past. This consideration must be tied to something happening in the present or future, creating a mutual exchange that demonstrates both parties are giving or giving something of values. Headline 1. Let's explore the principle through a case, Roscola vs. Thomas. Let's go live to our law correspondent, Natasha, for the detail.
Received. Thank you, Ms. Chia. I am Natasha, your law correspondent for today. Here I am with me, Roscola, who is the plaintiff in this case. Hi, Ms. Roscola.
Hi.
Okay, so there are some questions regarding the case I would like to ask you. What happened and why this case has to be brought to the court?
Okay, what happened was Thomas sold me the horse, and after the sale was completed, he told me that the horse was free from any sound and free from any vice. But this turned out rather far from the truth, and that's why I sued Thomas.
Thank you, Roscola, for the explanation. Here I am with me, Lord Denman Judge, who is the judge in this case. Judge Denman, would you care to elaborate more about this case?
Oh yes. The court had in favor of the defendants, as the defendant's promise was unenforceable because it was made after the sale. So he could not rely on his obligations under that contract as consideration for the defendant's later promise. So if the promise about the horse condition had been made before, the plaintiff would have been provided consideration for it by buying the horse. So basically the claimant had already agreed to buy the horse. So as it was made after the sale, the consideration was passed for it had not been given in written for the promise.
Thank you, Judge Denman, for the explanation.
Alright, welcome.
Here I am with me, Thomas, who is the defendant in this case. Hi, Thomas.
Hi.
Okay, so I heard that you win this case. How does it make you feel, and why do you think the court ruled in favor of you?
I'm very happy that I won this case. I knew I didn't breach any contract because the promise I made was not any term of any contract. And the claimant didn't even provide any consideration for it.
Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you.
That's all from me, your law correspondent, Natasha. Pass back to Ms. Chia.
Thank you, law correspondent Natasha. Now turning to VKC patterns, this case emphasized the requirement of fresh consideration when modifying existing contract. It reinforced the idea that contractual changes must involve new and valid consideration.
Now, I am the plaintiff counsel, and may I proceed with my argument?
Yes, please proceed.
So my argument is, there was no consideration that the document was not under seal. So the document is not a deed. And secondly, the consideration here was a future consideration, for which nothing was done. Yet that cannot be so, for the consideration is not the doing of the future act, but the promise to do the future act. Lastly, it was a really past consideration. It refers to past services, and past services cannot support a future promise. That's all. Thank you, Your Honor.
Okay, do we have a seat now? Yeah, Arif. I'm the defense counsel represent Ms. Casey. Yeah, Arif, may I continue with my material fact for this case? Yes, proceed. Casey, the defendant, managed some patents owned by the plaintiffs, Stewart and Charlton. The plaintiffs later wrote to the defendant, stating, in consideration of your services, we hereby agree to give you 1/3 share of the patents. The promise to give Casey shares was in return for work he had already done. So the plaintiff later refused to fulfill the promises, arguing that the defendant had not given any consideration to support and secure the promises. So my issue in this case is whether Casey's past consideration would be a good consideration in exchange for the promise. So Young Arif, my argument in this case is based on the principle of the consideration must not be passed. Casey already done for a part, which is manage the patent owned by the plaintiff, which is the steward and Charlton. So there is a consideration before obligation, which Casey must do the work. In exchange, the plaintiff should give 1/3 interest in the patent. So in certain situation, an act done before a promise to confer some benefit in exchange, for it can be good consideration for that promise if the act was done at the promisor request, or the parties understood that the act was remunerated by the conferring of a benefit, which is 1/3 interest that must be paid to Casey, or the payment, if it had been promised in advance, will have been legally recoverable. That's all, Young Arif.
By hearing that case, I decide that the defendant Casey won the case. A past service raises an implication that at the time it was entered it was to be paid for, and when you get in the subsequent document, a promise to pay that promise may be treated as an admission which fixes the amount of that reasonable remuneration. Therefore, Casey's past work was good consideration and the agreement was enforceable. Court dismissed.
Today, our headline revolves around a fundamental concept in contract law, the principle that consideration must not be passed. We have with us four distinguished legal professions to shed light on this crucial aspect. Joining us are experts with diverse roles: a contract lawyer from company Ma Weng Hai and Associates, a legal advisor from prominent company in Malaysia, a judge from the Court of Appeal in Kuala Lumpur, and lastly, a distinguished law jurist. Let's begin our insightful discussion. To kick things off, can each of our esteemed panelists share your initial insights on the relevance of the principle consideration must not be passed?
Thank you, Ms. Chow, for inviting me for your discussion regarding about consideration must not be passed. First of all, my point is about mutuality of obligation. So the requirement ensures that both parties are bound by reciprocal exchange, which means creating a sense of fairness and equality. If consideration could be based on past actions or promises, it might lead to an imbalance in the contract relationship, which means only one party is obligated without receiving anything in return. For example, let's say you promise to share your favorite homemade cookies with your friend every time they help you with your homework. So that means this is a simple example of mutuality of obligation. You both have commitment to each other, creating a fair and balanced arrangement in your relationship, in your friendship.
I agree with your opinion, Ms. Aisha. Well, I believe that the relevance of the consideration must not be passed is the intent to create legal relations. So contracts are legal instruments, and for a contract to be valid, there must be a clear intention by both parties to enter into a legally binding agreement. Requiring present consideration helps establish the parties are consciously engaging in a contractual relationship, reinforcing the seriousness of their commitment.
I'm quite agreed with Ms. Tanisha's point. Yes, I think obviously they are relevant for the consideration must not be passed. The consideration will avoid the ambiguity and disputes, as prohibiting past consideration reduces the likelihood of ambiguity and disputes. Past actions or promises may lack the necessary clarity and specificity required for a contract. By focusing on present consideration, the terms of the agreement are more likely to be well defined, reducing the potential for misunderstandings.
Thank you for the insight, Ms. Nabil. So here I would like to add some points. So basically, emphasizing that consideration must be preserve the essence of the bargaining process. So as we all know, contracts are a result of negotiation and mutual assent. Thus, past consideration, being devoid of this contemporaneous element, may not truly reflect the intentions of the parties at the time of entering into the contract.
Before we conclude this insightful discussion, I would like to extend my deepest gratitude to our esteemed panel of legal profession. Your expertise, perspective, and valuable insight have truly enriched our understanding for the relevance of the principle of consideration must not be passed. The principle that consideration must not be passed is a foundational tenet in contract law. It ensures the fairness and validity of contract by requiring a current and mutual exchange of value between parties at the time of agreement. This principle prevents unjust enrichment, upholds transparency, and reinforces the fundamental notions the contract should be based on a contemporaneous and equitable give and take. Thank you for joining us today. Stay tuned for more updates throughout the evening. For Five Guys News, I'm Shani En. Good afternoon.